I'd like to call a meeting of the Budget Committee to order. It's Monday, July 23rd, 2018, 7 p.m. We're in the Aldermanic Chamber. Would the clerk please call the roll?
Alderman at Large Laurie Wiltshire.
Here.
Alderman at Large Brian McCarthy.
Present.
Alderman at Large Michael O'Brien is present. Alderwoman at Large Shoshana Kelly.
Here.
Alderman at Large David Tenza.
Present.
Alderman Jan Schmidt.
Here.
Okay. The chairman, Richard Dowd.
Present. Okay, all accounted for?
Mm-hmm.
The first item on the agenda is public comment. Is there anyone that would like to speak in public comment? Seeing no one. Communications,
There are none.
new business resolutions.
Before us this evening is R 18053, establishing an expendable trust fund to accept donations for city events. Mr. Chairman, I would like to make a motion to recommend final passage.
Okay, the motion on the floor is to recommend final passage to the full board. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
All right.
Alderman O'Brien?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Also before us is R 18054, approving the cost items of a collective bargaining agreement between the National Board of Education and the National Association of School Principals from July 1st, 2018 through June 30th, 2022, and authorizing related transfers. Mr. Chairman, I would like to make a motion to recommend final passage.
Okay, the motion on the floor is to recommend final passage of R 18054, approving the cost items of collective bargaining agreement between the National Board of Education and the National Association of School Principals from July 1st, 2018 through June 30th, 2022, and authorizing related transfers. Anyone that'd like to come up and speak to that? Please identify yourself for the record.
My name is Dan Donovan. I'm the Chief Operating Officer for the school district. Was involved with this negotiation and contract. It is a 4-year contract, which is a good thing. The least amount of time you have to spend at the negotiating table, the better off you are to get other things done. It gets all the principals. The principals just, they were non-affiliated back a few years ago. I think it was about 4 years ago they created their union. This contract gets everyone on the correct step for experience. Because of affordability reasons, we weren't able to do that in the first couple of contracts. So this, just as the teacher's contract got everyone on their right step based on experience, this does the same thing, but it does it over a 3-year period. So at the end of the 3rd year of the 4-year contract, everyone will be on the correct level of experience, the correct step. So we think that's a fair thing and something we can get to. We thought it was a bit expensive to try to do it in the first year. This way it's spread out over 3 years. And it also, the other benefit of this contract, at the end of the 4 years, there is a grid in place which I would call affordable. Obviously, it can be negotiated going forward, but at the end of it, it's a grid that isn't 3 or 4% as a base grid. It's a base grid that probably around 1.5%. In this contract, there also are, for the district, there's a reduction in the amount of severance pay for, I believe it's people hired after June of 2011, where instead of a 60% rate, they will get a 45% rate. And also, there is a membership dues. We rejiggered the membership dues, and there's a savings to the district. This year, it's fairly significant, but I think going forward, it's probably about a $12,000 savings per year.
So was that the one that was eliminated before and now it's put back in?
Membership dues?
Yes.
Well, what was eliminated last time was that through a budget vote was the assistant principals didn't have any membership dues. So now what the deal is all principals will have membership, but it will be just with the National Association, not with the state and National Association.
Questions? Any questions on the principal's contract? One question I always ask is, in the FY18 budget, have you appropriated the amount of money that was needed to cover this contract?
I believe you meant the FY19 budget, but the answer to that question is yes.
Okay, so this takes effect, I thought this took effect.
Yeah, well, we were in FY19 now, right?
So
This
you
is the
have money
first-
in the current budget to cover this year.
Well, yes, in the
yeah.
FY19 budget, there is,
Okay.
yeah, it's pretty close. It's a couple thousand different, but I'm sure that we've already had, I believe, 3 or 4 principals resign, so there'll be some built-in attrition for the small difference. I think it's about $4,000 difference, so.
Okay. No other questions? Alderman Tenzu?
Can I just ask if you could, how do the salaries for assistant principals and principals compare to the salaries for teachers who are the most experienced teachers in the district?
The teachers, most teachers are probably master's teachers, so that's sort of step 3. Their salary at this point in time, I believe, is about $76,000. So the lowest, I don't know if I have it here, so the assistant principals at the elementary schools, if they came in with no experience at all, then, I don't know if I have, here it is.
You get the contract in front of you, I get it right here. If you need
Yeah, I have, it's 73.5. So you could possibly be a assistant principal at the elementary, and you could have a teacher, a senior teacher. But to be that senior teacher, you have to have about 20 years' experience. So there still is a little bit of that. That's probably something that, can't speak for the union, but something they'd like to sort of get so that a principal, even the first-year principal, would be on par at least with the senior teacher.
So correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that the principals and the vice principals work more time than teachers based on their position. And over the past few years, it had fallen to the point where it was almost, you could almost make more money as a teacher than being a vice principal. And I think you've corrected that, or in the process of correcting that. And because it was getting difficult to get people to make the jump, because it's a lot more responsibility and more time.
Yes, an assistant principal at the elementary works 199 days a year, teacher works 184 days a year. And a secondary principal works 214 days a year. But the secondary principals are higher. Their low is 83,000. But that's like I said, that's the very low. Most of our principals, I think all of them at this point in time, except for maybe one who just took the job and is a fairly young. It's not a 20-year teacher that took on the role. I think she's probably about a 9-year teacher.
Any other questions? Seeing none, thank you, Mr. Donovan.
Thank you.
So the motion on the floor is for final passage of our 18054, approving the collective bargaining between the principals and the school board. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Alderman O'Brien.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Also before us is R18055, approving the cost items of a collective bargaining agreement between the National Board of Police Commissioners and the National Police Patrolmen's Association from July 1st, 2018 through June 30th, 2022, and authorize related transfers. Mr. Chair, I would like to make a motion to recommend final passage.
Okay, the motion on the floor is to recommend final passage of R 18055, approving the cost items of a collective bargaining agreement between the National Board of Police Commissioners and the National Patrolmen's Association from July 1st, 2018 through June 30th, 2022, and authorizing related transfers. Would you like to come up and,
Mr. Chairman?
yes?
Yeah, Stephen Bolton, Corporation Counsel. I'm present, as well as Deputy Chief Lenahan and Karen Smith, the business administrator from the police department. The three of us were involved in negotiating the contract, and we're happy to answer any questions you might have. We'd be equally, if not more happy, if you didn't have any questions.
Yeah, I don't control that. Okay, could you, who wants to give an overview of the changes?
Four-year contract, the total costs priced out in the normal fashion show 2.3% increase, 4.3% increase, 2.8, and 4.0, all things considered. That's any ancillary costs in addition to any salary increases. As you know, I believe, Mr. Chair, the role of the Board of Aldermen, being the legislative body of the city, is to approve or disapprove of cost items. And that's what you have here is a cost analysis. I believe you've all gotten some communications earlier this week or the end of last week concerning ancillary matters, which some may think could have been handled differently. I will advise you that that's not the role of the Board of Aldermen as far as this contract is concerned.
Okay. Any questions concerning the contract? Alderman Tenza.
So I apologize, because I do have questions. I think, although I agree with Attorney Bolton, I think it's important to talk about some of those issues that have come up and just explain it for people watching, people who may be concerned with some of the things that have been reported on, specifically as they relate to the so-called EES schedule and police personnel files. And I know Deputy Chief Linehan is here, and Attorney Bolton is here as well. If someone could just explain what the change that's proposed, or even if it is a change as to the police department's practices right now, and what in practice, in theory, what it would actually mean for the specific patrolman. And first, if I could just ask too, is this a specific term that the police patrolmen's union negotiated for in this contract, or is this something that has been essentially part of the policy, or something similar part of the policy in the union contract?
Management brought this issue up and specifically negotiated to get the change in here. The salient change is that if there is a matter that calls for disclosure on the exculpatory evidence schedules, that cannot be purged from the employee's personnel file. Previously, there was a schedule, maybe schedule's the wrong word, there was a periods of time in which levels of disciplinary action would be removable from a police patrolman's personnel file. And that made no reference to Lori lists or exculpatory evidence schedules. Now we've specifically gotten the exculpatory evidence schedule into the contract, and that supersedes anything else as far as purging files. If something is on the exculpatory evidence schedule, it does not come out. And so that was a management proposal that we insisted on and essentially got what we were looking for.
This is in line, do you believe that this is in line with the Attorney General's policy on the exculpatory evidence schedule?
Yes, the department intends to follow the memorandum, include things on the exculpatory evidence schedule that the memorandum directs be included. Once included, it cannot be purged. Now, essentially for the first time, there will be a process by which an officer can challenge things being on the schedule. And if, in fact, as a result of whatever action takes place, be it in arbitration or elsewhere, an officer is removed or an officer's conduct is removed from the exculpatory evidence schedule, then you revert back and follow the policy. And if it's demonstrated that it did not happen, well, it comes out. That's the normal outcome in an arbitration procedure. If for some reason it doesn't meet the standard to be included in the exculpatory evidence schedule, it would come out in the normal course after the period of time required by the contract.
If I may follow up. In just with Deputy Chief Linehan, if you could give us a sense of what kind of conduct would end up in a officer's personnel file, which would not lead him or her to be placed on the exculpatory evidence schedule. And so for those people who don't know what the exculpatory evidence schedule is, it's a list, or it's a policy that was put forth by the Attorney General's office for officers who may have something in their personnel file which would be relevant to their testimony or service as an officer, which a criminal defendant could potentially be important or relevant to a trial in which the officer is testifying in.
Correct. Dennis Linehan, Deputy Chief, Nashua PD. The EES is specific to issues related to credibility, legal procedures, and excessive force type issues. Those three issues in which an investigation, and it has been sustained. This protocol from the AG's office initially, they wanted sustained and not sustained complaints to be in the officer's files, and that has since been removed in terms of the non-sustained allegations of any of those three, the credibility, the legal procedures, or excessive force. So in this situation here, if an officer were to have violated any of those three, the chief would then place that officer on the EES. And again, as mentioned by Attorney Bolton, there is now a procedure in place which the officer could appeal it. For other matters relating to our purging system and our discipline system, we have letters of warning, we have letters of training and counsel. And those forms of discipline are reserved normally for situations like multiple accidents that an officer may have been involved in. Could involve tardiness on the part of the officer, not responding to roll call or showing up for his shift. It's an avenue for us to take disciplinary action to try to correct that officer's behavior. However, it doesn't rise to the level in which it's his credibility or her credibility, a legal procedure, or an excessive force. However, there are steps that we need to take to correct some of these other actions that I guess we would consider on a lower scale, and that's what we would be purging, and that's what we reduce the number of years to in this new contract that's being proposed. But the EES, if an officer is found to be on the EES, yes, that will remain for life. Even after that officer retires, his name or her name will remain on that schedule. Follow up?
Deputy Chief Linehan, we were speaking earlier. You were telling me that if there is an investigation by the police department, by internal affairs, into an officer for whatever reason, even if it's unfounded, that investigation, any reports that are generated from that investigation, remain. Those aren't destroyed at any point during the officer's career or afterwards?
That's correct. So any internal affairs investigation that is conducted by our agency, that stays forever. We maintain a copy of the internal affairs record, which is separate from the personnel file, but the IA is retained by us. If there was a finding, there's a number of different findings
on these investigations. If it was a sustained finding on the IA, that would be placed into the personnel file of the officer, and again would remain consistent with if it fall under the EES. Not all complaints that come into us are handled as IAs, internal affairs investigations. That is a decision made by the chief. But I can tell you that every complaint that does come in that is documented is seen by the chief. And it's at that point that the chief will make a determination as to whether an IA will be initiated. If an IA is initiated, again, that record will be retained for forever. And unfortunately, we've had situations going back 20-plus years where we've had to present those files to the Attorney General's office because of some matters that have come forward as of late. So those files are kept by us. And I can tell you that the IAs that are done are binders. It could be multiple binders. And I think that we hold our officers accountable. And these IAs that are conducted are extremely thorough. And again, they are retained for life. And the personnel files, I know that there was maybe some documentation somewhere that these officers have free rein to go into their personnel files and kind of purge their own discipline. That is not accurate. There's a very strict guideline in which these officers have to adhere to even see their personnel file. And any purging that takes place has to be done with the authority of the police chief, Chief Lavoie. And then, again, there's procedures in place to make sure that that's done in the correct manner.
All set?
I have a couple follow-ups too, just to add on to that. So is it also your understanding that the current state of the law, I think there's some disagreement or question about whether, who actually is supposed to inspect the personnel files, that the county attorney's office or the county attorney himself should have some authority at any point, especially if there's an inquiry made into any one particular officer, that the prosecutor involved in the case also has the ability to inspect the personnel file to see if there's any potentially exculpatory information. The prosecutor as well has a obligation to investigate whether there's any prior incidents which may bear on the officer's credibility in any particular case.
Yes, that's absolutely correct. Yes.
So there are multiple checks, and we saw here in Nashua within the last couple of years, with Chief Susing, there was an issue with him, and even though I believe something had been taken out of his personnel file, as it properly taken out, it was essentially reopened and looked at, and ultimately determined there was no issues, but there's always that defendant has a right to go back and look, and it's ultimately up to the courts to make a decision whether it's exculpatory or not.
Exactly. When we get these notifications from either the Attorney General's office or the County Attorney's office, and they send their request to subpoena these officers, it is our duty as an administration to notify that prosecuting body if there's any exculpatory information in, or what we believe may be exculpatory. What we may find exculpatory, they may not, or vice versa. But if there's any question at all, we are on the side of caution. We'll absolutely allow the prosecutors, as that is their right, to come in and view this, and we'll notify the prosecutors that there may be a potential credibility issue, or there may be something in that individual officer's file that may be exculpatory in nature.
We've probably gone a lot further into the weeds on something we have no control over than we should have, but since it was in the paper on the front page, allowed a little leeway, but that is not an item that we have any control over. It's between the negotiating body and the union themselves.
And thank you, Mr. Chairman. I understand that, but I think it's just important to get the information out there since the issue was raised. I think to try to help answer anyone's question as to why administration brought this up, and it certainly is a topic that's discussed a lot in the criminal bar here in the state of New Hampshire. And I think ultimately that the chair is right, that this is something that was negotiated for, and that we, frankly, is a policy that the police department should handle and not, we shouldn't be legislating here at this board how they're going to handle it.
So, but we did give a little leeway there so you could get the answers to your questions.
I appreciate it. Can I ask a follow-up on the finances?
Sure.
Thank you. Can I just ask, another thing that was brought up was a 10% increase for the police patrolman over 4 years. How will this bring National Police in line with other departments? And how will it affect the department's ability to fully staff the patrolmen's units? Not necessarily this year, but as we get into fiscal year 2022.
I think, again, Dennis Linehan, Deputy Chief, I think in regards to the salary increases, the wage increases that are being proposed here, I think that will keep our patrolmen competitive with the larger agencies within the state, New Hampshire State Police and Manchester. Manchester's always going to be a little bit higher because of the way that their salaries run. However, I do think that it's going to keep our patrolmen competitive with those agencies. I also think from a recruitment standpoint, I have to be honest with you and tell you, I don't even know if the wages is going to really draw more people, but I can tell you that I think that it will allow us to retain the officers that we do have. And I know that it's been spoken to before in regards to how difficult it is for us and other police agencies throughout the country, really, how difficult it is to recruit new officers. And the salary, I think, will definitely help, but I can't say that that is going to be the cure in getting 500 people to show up at our next test. I do think that the change in the contract in regards to certified police officers, where they will now start off as a second-year patrolman rate, we're already getting information from officers in other departments in this state that they would very quickly submit applications to our agency based on that change in the contract, where they would be paid at the second-year patrolman rate and be able to take some vacation time, which now, currently, we don't allow them to do based on the contract. But again, I can tell you that we do have some irons in the fire in regards to some officers that have already expressed an interest. So again, I think that it'll help us retain these officers, and I do think it's going to attract some certified members. And hopefully it does attract some non-certifieds as well.
Other questions? Alderman Wiltshire.
Thank you. I, as you know, sit in on the police commission meetings, and month after month, we hear how difficult it is to attract candidates. So I think that's a step in the right direction if we can, especially if we can recruit certified officers. So I think that's a step in the right direction.
So, question I have, I ask every time we have a contract, for the first year of the contract, are the funds transfers that are in the resolution adequately budgeted?
Karen Smith, yes, they're adequately budgeted.
Excellent. Okay. Other questions? Just want to thank you and all the police officers from the city for the job that they do on a day-to-day basis. Certainly, it's not very easy these days with what's going on nationwide. I do have one question. How many police forces in the state of New Hampshire are accredited?
I don't know off the top of my head. If I had to throw out a guess, I'm just trying to go over some of them in my head right now that I know. It would be in the minority. the minority of the police departments in the state are accredited, nationally accredited. Some of the larger agencies are, but it wouldn't be fair actually for me to even estimate as to how many are accredited.
I've been in several of the briefings on that accreditation, and it's testimony to how good our police force is and the ratings that they get nationally, so.
Well, we appreciate that, Chairman, and we appreciate the support, and the accreditation process is a very difficult one, and yet we seem to, every time we go through it, not only are we adhering to the policies and procedures, but we actually are walking the walk. And I think a lot of these police agencies that are accredited on paper, they meet the guidelines, but then when it comes to actually putting that into action, they fall a little short. And, we're proud to say that we, in fact, actually, our actions are the guidelines that are set forth by CALEA.
Excellent. One last chance. Any other questions? Seeing none, the motion on the floor is to recommend final passage of R 18-055, approving the cost items of a collective bargaining agreement between the National Board of Police Office Commissioners and the National Police Patrolmen's Association from July 1st, 2018 through June 30th, 2022, and authorizing related transfers. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Alden O'Brien.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Also before us is R 18057, changing the purpose of up to $250,000 of unexpended bond processes from the three projects, Broad Street Elementary School, Sunset Heights Elementary School, and LED street lighting, to the district-wide middle school's renovation and construction project for funding, engineering, and architectural services. Mr. Chairman, I would like to make a motion of final passage.
The motion on the floor is to recommend final passage of R 18057, changing the purposes of up to $250,000 of unexpected bond proceeds from three projects to the district middle school renovation and construction project for funding, engineering, and architectural services. Alderman McCarthy, do you want to speak to that, or do you want me to?
Sorry, what am I speaking to?
The bond transfer?
You can go ahead. Oh, yeah, this is just the, taking some of the proceeds that are left over from the previous elementary school projects and moving them toward the middle school's project so that we can engage the services of an architect for pre-construction studies.
Yeah, the Board of Education has transferred the middle school project to the Joint Special School Building Committee, and hopefully Thursday night we'll be releasing the RFP to hire the engineering and architectural services for that project, so that we can get the final pricing on what the alternatives are. Any questions? Alderman Kelly.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Chair, actually wanted to know if we use unexpended bond proceeds, does that go within the time of the original bond, or does it extend it?
It extends it,
Okay.
and that's actually in the resolution, yes.
When we approve bond authorization, we don't buy the bonds. In fact, we typically spend the money first and then bond it afterwards, except in some very large projects. Because we have a fairly large fund balance, we can fund the projects and then we refund the fund balance from the bond proceeds once we know how many they are. So the bonds this anticipates have not been let yet. We would, at some point in the future, when we say 20-year bonds for a school project, that may be 5 different bonds that take 25 years to come and go, because the first year we won't do anything. The second year we'll fund bonds for what we've already spent. The third year we fund what we spend in the second year. So in this case, we haven't spent any of this money yet, so the bonds do not exist as bonds, just the authorization exists at this point.
Thank you very much.
And then we go taking, extreme vetting of all the requirements of the different projects, and we've been very good at ending up with a fund balance on these. And we have in the past transferred money forward to cover the next project's engineering so that we can get it started. And then when we have a valid price that gets approved, then we can bond for that to conduct the project. Any other questions? Seeing none, the motion on the floor is for final passage of R 18-057. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, motion carries. Okay, Alderman O'Brien.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. There is no new business orders.
Okay. General discussion. Does anybody have anything they talk about? No? Okay. Public comment? There is no public, so there's no public comment. Remarks by Alderman? No. I just again want to thank the police department for the work they do. They're on a very dangerous job on a day-to-day basis, even in Nashua, but they keep things pretty good here in town, and we should always praise their work. There's not a need for non-public. Do I hear a motion, Alderman Wiltshire?
Adjourn.
Motion is to adjourn. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, motion carries. We're adjourned at 7:36.